Welcome everybody to my channel, Pro Wrestling Photography, something I've been really interested in basically my whole life, and that is wrestling. And I realized that I ended up becoming a film major at Minnesota State of Moorhead, University of Moorhead, and I was always the one behind the camera. So I was always the one composing the shots, always the one and figuring out what angles, what cool stuff to get at everything like that. Going through this, you'll see me at my roughest points because the thing that's on the screen right now is my very first wrestling show I went to, not just as a fan. It was September 27th of 2014. Everybody kind of knows that I went to high school with a wrestler named Darren Corbin and Ryan Cruz. And when I moved to Minneapolis from the Fargo area, I really wanted to get into the wrestling business, but I know I am not an athlete at all. So I realized with my eye and with everything I could contribute, the best way for me to help out would be taking photos, doing video, doing commentary, which we'll get into eventually. All of that, Corbin set me up with Pro Wrestling Battleground. I cannot thank him enough because I work there to this very day. It's one of the promotions I've stuck with the longest and had the longest tenure with. And yeah, really excited to kind of go through this. So yeah, my first photo right here is the King of Throwdown, Venom, on the stage at Willepski's Blues Saloon, taking on a guy everybody in this area loved, Udo. Udo actually, shortly after I started, ended up moving, but I got a couple really cool shots of him from these first shows. You can see early on, like, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, this is obviously not a fast enough shutter for the moves that I'm doing, especially not with a flash. You can see Mr. Wayne McCarty right behind me taking a much better photo of this moment, I'm sure. And yeah, I just was hanging out. I was supposed to start doing commentary for Battleground, but the first show I was at, the guy that was going to be my commentary partner was not able to make the show. So I was just kind of sitting there doing nothing. I was like, hey, I've got a camera. I might as well actually do something. The Husky Heartthrob himself, Cody Rice. Yeah, the Husky Heartthrob, the now hardcore Heartthrob, making a name for himself down at IWA Mid South and AAW and a bunch of other places. But yeah, this was 2014. So I, Officer Rob Justice and I have a fun relationship because he claims he is the most unphotogenic wrestler in the area. And I try to take good photos of him. It just sometimes, for some reason, it just doesn't happen. This is another one that I was starting to get like, hey, I can use these settings, I can use this, and maybe that'll be fast enough, and it won't look terrible, but it still looked terrible. Like, you can see the motion blur there on the hand, like stuff like that. I don't know why it drives me crazy, but it just drives me nuts. Luther and Cody with the win. Darren Corbin, as usual, like I said, the man who got me connected into this crazy world of pro wrestling. Got a couple good shots of Corbin and ring announcer Rob Effin Page. Corbin, of course, the joys of indie wrestling. Sometimes you have somebody there to take the ring jackets and ring shirts and extra gear, and sometimes it's up to the guys is to be responsible to grab it themselves. I love the fact that I know exactly what happened during this shoot, during this shot, even though it's almost 4 years later. There was a wrestler in the audience who was insulting Corbin, and he just, being the bad guy that he is, just said to her, "You must be this tall to speak." If you know the Minnesota wrestling scene at all, this is a matchup that has happened numerous times. Two of the best guys in this entire area. Uh, that is Darren Corbin getting clotheslined and doing the clotheslining. The anarchist himself, Mr. Eric Cannon. The Prophet. This is one of the few shots that I actually still like from this show. They're few and far between of like, whoa, wow, that actually turned out really cool. Is Money Matt Cage with a not great photo, a slightly blurry, out of focus photo, and Christian Rose. They admittedly have wrestled each other 500 trillion times, but that's because their chemistry is so good against one another. Like, really, I like the back and forth earth that they had. Yeah, and I was just shooting up from the balcony, so I'd get these interesting high angle shots because at this point, since it was my first time, I didn't really want to go down ringside because I didn't know how cluttered it would be. I didn't want to be in people's way, all this stuff. And then finally so I got all these like high angle shots, a very overly processed shot. Wow, what was I doing here? This shot that I can look back at and be like, okay, at least my first wrestling show that I was taking photos at, I still have a couple shots that I can look back at and be like, oh, that one wasn't terrible. That's actually a pretty cool shot. Um, and then the hug afterwards. I'm really glad that you could tune into this first episode, and I should hopefully be back sometime next week with a new episode.